These are my top 10 favorite books of all time. This is an essential reading list. But I have to say, these are not the most pleasant books I've ever read, trust me. These books broke me open and made me feel things I've never felt before. I sobbed through this entire book and it was so good, but I honestly don't know that I could read it again. These are all books that lit my hair on fire, meaning they changed my heart, mind, and soul in a profound way forever, and I'll never be the same. Are you excited? So let's get this party started, counting down my top 10 favorite books of all time. Let's discover which titles made the list and why they stand out among the rest. So here we go, counting down from number 10. Little sip of courage. Number 10 is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. So this book is an allegory. And when I first started reading it, honestly, I checked and rechecked the title over and over again because I'd heard so much about it as people's favorite self-help book. And on its surface, it's just a deceptively simple tale about a shepherd. And it doesn't always spell out the lessons you learn from it. This is the story of Santiago, a shepherd who leaves his home country on a quest for treasure. Dig deeper and you find an allegory of self-discovery that we all have to go on if we want to uncover and fulfill our deepest desires. The narrative both begins and concludes with a dream, a recurring dream Santiago's had since childhood about discovering hidden treasure. And this dream appealed to me on so many different levels. I love a fantasy, I love an adventure, and as I listened to this book, I began to suspect there was more to this dream than meets the eye. Santiago's always had a nagging suspicion that this dream has a deeper meaning, so he consults a fortune teller who tells him to journey to the pyramids to find the buried treasure. So he sells the flock and sets off on a journey to Egypt. There's a recurring theme throughout this book that suggests that the dreams signify the deepest desires of the dreamer. He goes through so many trials and tribulations. He's robbed, he's attacked. It is not a straight path to the pyramids. He got stopped so many times along the way and could have stopped and stayed complacent where he was, but he remembered his purpose and pressed on. I became fascinated by the concept of alchemy for the first time in this story. And in simple terms, alchemy is just the concept of turning base metals into gold. And this was one of the first times in my life I'd ever discovered the concept that a person could be truly transformed. A person can change, evolve, and grow so much over time as to become almost unrecognizable. And I feel like I've done that with my life. I've changed so much from the person I was in my 20s, I almost don't recognize that person. As a side note, I just want to mention, I listened to this book on Audible and it was narrated by Jeremy Irons. He's a very talented actor and he has one of the most recognizable and soothing voices of all time. It took me forever to get through this book because every time I listened to it, I would instantly fall asleep. It was interesting, but his voice is too soothing. The most important takeaway from this book seems to be that it's important to follow your dreams and follow your personal legend. Santiago's journey teaches us that we should never give up on our dreams, no matter how difficult the journey may seem. I've got to reread this book. That message feels very poignant for my life right now. Number 9 is A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. In many ways, this book feels like a love letter written to Paris. My excitement about this book comes from having read A Movable Feast in Paris when I was there. This book chronicles Hemingway's time living in Paris as a starving artist, living, working, and writing in Paris in the Roaring 20s. I reviewed Hemingway in my video, 10 Legendary Authors Who Shaped My World, so go check that out after you finish watching this video. I bought A Movable Feast at the Shakespeare & Company bookstore where Hemingway actually hung out in the 20s. He would borrow books from the owner of the bookstore like a library because he was so poor he literally couldn't afford books. This book reveals Hemingway's work ethic, his problems with his parents and women, his creativity, and the way he was influenced by other writers like Gertrude Stein and James Joyce. In the book, he refers to Paris as a movable feast that you can take with you anywhere, and I feel I've adopted this idea in my life. Every magical place I visit becomes a movable feast that I can carry in my heart and recreate at any time because it's become a part of me. Number 8, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee is another classic. It was an instant success when it was published in 1960, and it won the Pulitzer Prize just a year later. This book tells the deeply moving story of attorney Atticus Finch. He defends Tom Robinson, a man of color who's been accused of raping a young white woman in town. This story deals with racial injustice, class, courage, compassion, and a biased judicial system. But the beauty and charm of this book come from the narrator, who happens to be a precocious little 6-year-old girl named Scout Finch. Scout is a charming, fascinating little tomboy, and throughout the book, the reader sees the burgeoning of a new little feminist. Throughout this book, Harper Lee paints pictures that are so vivid, they have stuck in my mind for over 30 years. I want to read you one of my favorite lines from this book. Ladies bathed before noon, after their 3 o'clock naps, and by nightfall were like tea cakes with frostings of sweat and sweet talcum. They were in no hurry, for there was nowhere to go, nothing to buy, and nothing to buy with it, and nothing to see outside the boundaries of Macomb County. That struck me so deeply because it perfectly encapsulates my childhood. It was so hot in summer, there was no way to hurry and nowhere to go. And in my young and anxious mind, it just felt like sitting, quietly sweating, and waiting to die. Scout Finch, by the way, has to be the coolest character name of all time. And Harper Lee has to be the coolest author name of all time. I think it's simply a tragedy she did not write more books. Supposedly, she only wrote 2 books, and they were published 55 years apart. Number 7 is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. This is a beautiful story of disaster, redemption, revenge, and the idea that revenge is not the ultimate answer. It was originally published as a series installment in France in 1844. It was instantly popular, and it was like a gripping TV series these days, and people at work and in the streets discussed it endlessly. Our main character, Edmond Dantes, is wrongfully accused of treason by his friend and romantic rival, but he doesn't know it's his friend who turned him in at first. He's imprisoned in the remote Chateau d'If without trial and forgotten forever. After 6 long years of solitary confinement, Dantes is on the verge of suicide when he meets a mentor, Daria, who challenges him and teaches him about critical thinking. Over time, under the mentorship of Faria, Dantes starts to realize that it was his friend, his nefarious shipmates, and a crooked politician who betrayed him. He becomes consumed by hatred and rage, even as he is learning, growing, and evolving under the mentorship of Faria. Faria senses that he's about to die, so he starts to encourage Dantes to hunt for the buried treasure that Faria, found before he was imprisoned. Dantes escapes from prison miraculously, finds the treasure, becomes the mysterious and wealthy Count of Monte Cristo, and goes to Paris to avenge himself. Okay, I do have a spoiler for this one, so if you want to skip to the next story, I'll put the chapters down below and you can skip ahead. So he basically ends up exacting revenge on all his accusers. But there are so many moral lessons and opportunities to learn throughout the text. The main lesson of this book is that revenge does more damage to the revenger than to the avenged. This book really shook me to my core when I read it because I've always been a person who intrinsically just needed everything to be fair. I've been like that since birth. I'm still like that today. I don't want the biggest piece of cake, but I don't want anyone else to have it either. I think everything should be even and fair. I believe I was in high school when I read this book, so the sense of outrage and righteous anger on Dantes' behalf just consumed me when I read this book. And I was so struck by Edmond's compassion and sense of kindness when he finally let go of his all-consuming need for revenge. and that punishing those who wronged you doesn't always make the world a better place, because innocent people are harmed in the exacting of that revenge. Number 6 is 1984 by George Orwell. This one is a dystopian novel set in a totalitarian society led by a dictator, Big Brother. So this is where we get the euphemism Big Brother whenever we're talking about someone watching us. We follow the main character, Winston, who works as a low-level government employee whose job it is to alter records to fit the party agenda. Winston quickly becomes disillusioned with the party because they use public manipulation, oppression, and physical violence in order to promote their propaganda. So he begins a covert relationship with Julia, a co-worker who also hates the party. Together, they seek moments of personal freedom and truth in a society where free thought is punished. So I know we're not there yet, but this book really hit home for me. There does seem to be a trend toward collective thought and not being able to disagree with the public for fear of being ostracized. So their rebellion ends up leading them to O'Brien, who they think is part of a resistance. But O'Brien turns out to be a loyal party member and betrays them. Winston and Julia are arrested, they're tortured and brainwashed, and Winston finally succumbs and ends up loving Big Brother. This novel explores themes of totalitarianism, censorship, and the nature of truth and individuality. This was a terrifying and disturbing book for me because Orwell just makes it so real. He makes it so believable that this could all be happening. His writing reminds me a little bit of Margaret Atwood in that respect, and The Handmaid's Tale, where you can really see how our society might unintentionally start moving in that direction. Number 5 is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. I read this book at a time in my life where I was a very young girl with not much money, and I was really seeking at that time in my life. I was trying to figure out the purpose of life. And this book is a reflection on just living simply in natural surroundings. Thoreau spent 2 years in a small cabin in Massachusetts, living simply, living off the land, exploring the benefits of a minimalist lifestyle. The book begins with Thoreau's observations on society and its unnecessary complexities. Here's a quote from Thoreau. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." And that hit me so hard right between the eyes. I think this book was one of the influences on me that caused me to become such a seeker, because I was always afraid of living a life without purpose and without meaning. Here's another quote that I think is apt for this video and for whatever you may be going through in life. "If one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life with which he has imagined, he will meet with success, unexpected in common hours." That's beautiful. Number 4 is Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. This book changed my life. It truly awakened me to the concept of financial freedom. I felt like my hair was on fire when I read this book. I had never heard these concepts before. My husband's brilliant with money, but I had been taught work hard, save all you can, and never use credit cards, which is a surefire way to never get rich. And my dad has since learned so much about money, and he's invested in real estate, and he's doing great now. So I'm so happy for him. But this book is a story about 2 dads, one with a wall full of degrees and the other a high school dropout. One, after death, will leave nothing but debt behind, and the other will become one of the richest men in Hawaii. The poor dad would say, "I will never be rich," and his prophecies became true. The rich dad said, even after bankruptcy, "I am a rich man." And the difference is that being broke is temporary. Being poor is eternal. So it's all about your mindset. I would say my two greatest takeaways from this book are, number one, the educational system in this country was built to create the greatest employees and factory workers. Our education system is not built to create entrepreneurs. I've seen that with myself and my children. And my number two top takeaway is you can never save enough to be rich. You have to start making your money work for you, such as investing. I am clearly not a financial professional, but if you've never invested before, I would recommend going very safe with mutual funds or index funds. So please don't take my advice. Go talk to a financial professional about all this. I just read this book and absolutely loved it, and it changed my life. And I feel like it changed the way I think about finances forever. So if you're in debt, the first step is to get out of debt. And I would recommend Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University to get out of debt. He also coined the phrase, live like no one else, so you can live like no one else. And I feel like my husband and I do that. We've sacrificed a lot to get where we are. So once you're out of debt, you need to save for emergencies and about 3 months' salary. So think of emergencies like something that's a surprise that happens. Your car needing new tires is not an emergency. That is maintenance that you can budget for. Needing Christmas presents for the kids or back to school clothes and supplies are not emergencies. Those are things that happen to all of us every year. We need to be budgeting and planning for these things. Emergencies are unexpected things that happen, acts of God, fires, floods, things like that. Then, after you've gotten out of debt, after you've saved a little bit for emergencies and your 3 months salary to make sure you have that to fall back on if you need to, then you need to start investing. Then start making your money work for you. Poor people work for money. Rich people have discovered how to make their money work for them. This book really blew my hair back, and it's the number one book I would recommend for finances. Number 3 is Night by Elie Wiesel, and it's a fictionalized account of Ellie's experiences in the Holocaust. This is a book where I started crying almost immediately and sobbed through the entire thing. The book opens up introducing Eliezer, who is Ellie's character in the book. He's a studious young teenager who encounters Moshe the Beadle. Moshe ends up getting deported along with any other foreign townsfolk, and he comes back several months later with a fantastic tale about being forced to dig graves, and then they were shot and forced into their own graves, and he somehow was the only one to escape. But none of the townspeople believed him. His story sounded to them too cruel, outlandish, and fantastical to be true. Very soon after that, however, Ellie's family is forced from their homes into a part of town called a ghetto, along with all their family and friends, and they have to wear stars on their clothing. There are other restrictions, including food rationing and curfews. Later, Ellie's family and all their acquaintances are forced onto cattle cars with 80 other people. His descriptions of that cattle car are burned into my memory forever. The car was so hot and crowded, it was difficult to move, and they had no food, no water, and no bathrooms. So they all hold off as long as they can, but after a while, they all had to go. Imagine how many sick people were on this car as well, from being malnourished, mistreated, and cold all the time. So a lot of people don't believe the rumors that are going around about the Nazis and the Gestapo. The prisoners think they're actually on their way to a labor camp where they'll be treated fairly and kept with their families. But when they arrive at the concentration camp, men and women are separated. They're ripped from their families, and this is the last time Elie will ever see his mother and sisters again. He and his father are sent to the men's side, and Elie ends up being the only survivor of his family. He'll never know what became of his mother and sisters, but his father died of dysentery, malnutrition, and severe beatings. Towards the end of the war, the Gestapo received word that Russia was coming to liberate their prisoners. So they forced all the prisoners of this camp to flee. Wiesel's writing is incredible, and he forced me to visualize the vicious dogs, the cries of a sick old rabbi. I could smell the pervasive fear of the fleeing evacuees and viscerally feel the brutal cruelty. I sobbed through this entire book, and it was so good, but I honestly don't know that I could read it again. Number 2 is Beloved by Toni Morrison, published in 1987. No book has made me sob harder than this book. It was so heartbreaking and horrifying. I cannot overstate how much this book devastated me. A former slave woman named Seth had escaped slavery and was living free for 10 years. Seth is consumed and haunted by a ghost she's convinced is her oldest daughter. Morrison writes about ethnic identities when informed by trauma and post-traumatic stress. Beloved examines the dehumanizing effects of slavery. This book revealed to me some of the devastating realities of slavery that I never knew existed. Attack dogs that were sicked on the men on the chain gangs. They were kept in crates and given bowls of food like dogs. I was aware that some of the women were sexually assaulted, but I hadn't heard that some of the men trapped on chain gangs or in the crates were also sexually assaulted. After she escaped, 4 horsemen came to Seth's home to take her and her children back into slavery. She was so terrified and repulsed by going back into living that life that she fled to the woodshed behind her house with her children to kill them. She thought she could save them from an unimaginable life of slavery by doing that. She said she wanted to put them back where they would be safe. For some reason, she was only able to kill her oldest daughter, and then she and the others escaped the men. From then on, Seth lives a half-life in a home she feels is haunted by her eldest daughter. Her other children live in fear of her, and her 2 boys run away as soon as they're old enough to survive on their own. Beloved was banned in many schools in 2022 due to themes of infanticide, bestiality, sex, and violence. This book is written in a very unique style. The timelines are fluid, the narrator has a tenuous grasp on reality, and she believes that ghosts are as real as other people, so it's a little bit difficult to follow at times. It's spooky, it's dark, it's confusing, but this is the first book that opened my heart to the true dark, deep, and secret horrors of slavery. It's not just the captivity or the dehumanizing treatment, it's some of the horrific atrocities that were perpetrated during that captivity. And my number 1 favorite book of all time has to be I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. If you're interested in literature, I'm sure you're familiar with Maya Angelou. I discovered her in high school and absolutely fell in love with her voice. If you want to read anything by Maya, please, please, please listen to it. Her voice will pierce you to your very soul. I highly recommend this book to anyone who needs to have their heart opened and the depth of their fortunate privilege laid bare. I dealt with anxiety and depression from a very young age, but this book opened my eyes to the horrors that some other little girls experience, the trauma that whole groups of people endure before they're even grown. It opened my eyes to how lucky and sheltered I was. Whenever I get down about life or feel sorry for myself, all I have to do is turn to I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. But somehow her works are not depressing. They're beautiful, transformative, and deeply personal. This biography tells the story of Maya's life from when she was only 3 and was sent across country by train from California to Arkansas, along with her brother because her parents decided to get a divorce. And she talks about the other passengers of color having pity on her and her brother and giving them food. When she got to Arkansas, they lived with her paternal grandmother in a horrifically racist town. They watched people of color in their community working back-breaking labor in the cotton fields with no hope of ever getting ahead. They faced a white dentist refusing to work on their teeth because of their color, even though their relatively wealthy grandmother had loaned him money during the Depression. At the age of 8, Maya was sexually assaulted by her mother's boyfriend, which trauma caused confusion for her about men and sex for many years to come. But she somehow transformed these experiences through alchemy into one of the most beautiful and successful literary careers in American history. I want to read this poem from which Maya gained inspiration for her title. I know why the caged bird sings, ah me, when his wing is bruised and his bosom sore, when he beats his bars and would be free. It is not a carol of joy or glee, but a prayer that he sends from his heart's deep core, but a plea that upward to heaven he flings. I know why the caged bird sings. I just got chills reading that. This video has really been a joy to make. I just feel like I've been on a roller coaster ride back through history, revisiting these books that had such a profound impact on my life. I so hope you read them, and I think they'll change you too. If you want to continue this journey with me, I'd love you to check out the top 10 legendary authors that changed my worldview forever. So I'll link that above and below. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great day. And if you like this shirt, I'll link it down below. It says be kind. I saw when I was skiing one day, I saw a woman with a Be Kind sticker on the back of her ski helmet. And I've always remembered that, and I always try to find things that say be kind on them now, like shirts, hats. I have a sticker on my water bottle that says be kind. It's just a cool reminder to other people, and I think makes us feel a little more connected.